Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please bear with us as we allow everyone to come in from the waiting room. And we'll get started briefly. Thank you so much, everybody. Just another moment. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. A few more people are trickling in. Let me welcome you all to the Program on Education Policy and Governance webinar series. I'd like to introduce at this time our program's director, Professor Paul Peterson, Henry Lee Shattuck Professor of Government and Director of the Program on Education Policy and Governance here at Harvard Kennedy School. Paul?
Thank you, Antonio. Welcome to you all to the first session of our conference on a safe place to learn, school safety and American education. The event is being held weekly from noon to 1 p.m. each Friday through June 3rd. And as Antonio said, it's sponsored by the Program on Education Policy and Governance. I'm delighted to be able to feature David Banks, the Chancellor of the New York City Public School System, as our feature speaker today. But before introducing him, let me offer just a few words on the purpose of the conference. As you all know, students are returning to in-person learning, and safety has come to the fore as they return to school in a situation that is different from anything we have experienced before. School staff, parents, and students are reporting dramatic rises in school bullying and violence, as well as major increases in mental health issues. Parents are refusing to send their children to school for fear of their own child's safety. So the purpose of this series is to explore these challenges and to consider the appropriate responses to them. What can schools do about this problem? So I want to introduce Daniel Hamlin, a professor of education at the University of Oklahoma, who's an expert on school safety and has helped to organize this conference. He and I will share the duties of moderating during the session at all sessions and including today's session. Before turning the podium over to Daniel, I want to recognize Antonio Wentland, Nick Tavares, and Michael Poor, who have carried the administrative and technical workload for the conference. So Daniel, would you please introduce our speaker for today?
Thank you very much, Paul. So today, of course, I have the pleasure of introducing Chancellor Banks. And as Paul mentioned, he heads New York City's public schools, which is the largest public school system in the nation. It serves around 1 million students in the city's 5 boroughs. Chancellor Banks himself, he's a lifelong New Yorker and also a product of New York City's public schools. Before being appointed to Chancellor this year, he also previously worked as a school safety officer and as a teacher in New York City. So I can't think of someone better to talk to today. He also founded the first all-boys public school in the city. He's held many community-based roles. He is co-founder of Black Ed Influencers United. He served on the board of directors for the International Boys Schools Coalition. He's co-chair of New York City's Young Men's Initiative and founding board member of the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color. So once again, a really big thank you to Chancellor Banks for taking time to join us today. And to the audience, we're going to begin with Chancellor Banks offering a few opening remarks, and then Paul and I will pose a couple of questions to Chancellor Banks based on his remarks. And then from there, we hope to make the session as interactive as possible. So we hope to take lots of questions from you, the audience, and we encourage you to pose your questions to Chancellor Banks using the Q&A function in Zoom. So by doing that, that'll allow us to find your question. And also, please keep your questions brief. That way we can locate them quickly and then pose them to the Chancellor. So with that, Chancellor Banks, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn things over to you.
Well, listen, thank you so very, very much, Professors Peterson and Hamlin, for inviting me here today and for the warm introduction. It's certainly my pleasure to be joining you today. Listen, I would say, I think we would all agree that nothing is more important than ensuring that all students can learn in supportive, caring environments. I'm so happy that you've put this conference together, and I certainly hope that some of what I would share with you today, you would find helpful for your national audience as they're all grappling with these issues around school safety. And in New York City, that means offering what we call an ecosystem of care for the whole child. And this care prioritizes student well-being, ensures physical and emotional safety, and supports students in reaching their full potential. So I cannot overstate the importance of having a comprehensive school safety strategy, and how honored I am to be able to share New York City's strategy for creating safe, welcoming, and affirming schools. So the recent shooting in the subway was a powerful reminder as to why safety must be a part of every school system's DNA. As you all surely know, on April 12th, a gunman shot 10 people and injured nearly 24 on an N train in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. So here's how that day went down for the nation's largest public school system. Because our team keeps open lines of communication, the New York City Police Department, we were immediately alerted to this public incident. Our team properly assessed the potential impact for our students, our schools, and staff. And as a school system that's nearly 1 million children, we know that any incident that impacts the city likely touches the lives of our students and families. So really, out of an abundance of caution and for the safety of our students, we placed all schools in the area in what we call a shelter in. So let me briefly describe what that looked like. During a shelter in, there is no entry into nor exit from the building. However, it is business as usual inside the building. That means there's no disruption to the learning process. And in this particular case, the danger was outside the building, and the school's building response team was securing and staffing all the doors. The building response team is comprised of building personnel, including teachers and administrators, who've been trained to assist the school during an incident. We worked closely with the NYPD and school leadership to ensure that every school had the supports that they needed as we worked to ensure the safety of our school communities. We shared updates on Twitter and through local news outlets throughout the day as they became available. At the majority of schools, the shelter in place was lifted by early afternoon. However, it remained in place for schools nearest the subway station where the incident occurred. With our partners at the NYPD, we provided extra support for a safe transition home. Principals communicated with parents regarding all the specifics. And by 4 p.m. that day, all dismissals had been completed without incident for students across all the impacted schools. But our work didn't end there. Following that incident, we deployed social workers to affected schools to provide support to students and staff. We worked with the NYPD School Safety Division to increase visibility at the nearby schools. We must remember that in a time of crisis, leadership is critical. And in this instance, our leadership involved collaboration, coordination, and communication. This was just one day and one way in which we're called upon to keep our students safe. It's an awesome responsibility, a responsibility that I take home with me every night and I wake up with every morning around 5 a.m. Because our schools are safe havens for our students, and they are critical in supporting students as they emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's my priority to give our children what they need to grow into the very best people we know that they can be. And that means addressing the toll that this pandemic and other traumatic experiences have had on our students' mental well-being. Doing this work will not only help our children thrive academically, but it will also help create safer, more secure learning environments. So as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our students have experienced some form of trauma or hardship. We were excited to welcome our students and staff back to full-time, in-person learning last September after an interruption of 18 months. I'm proud that we made it possible for our students to learn together in safe and supportive school environments. Now, that being said, during this time, some of our communities experienced an uptick of violence. These unfortunate outcomes of the pandemic have also manifested in some of our schools, and I dare say in many of our schools. The number of weapons or dangerous instruments retrieved in or on the perimeter of a school building has increased by 80% compared to the 2018-2019 school year to over 3,300. Fighting and physical aggression continue to be top infractions in schools. Year to date, compared to pre-pandemic trends, our most serious level 5 infractions are up, an increase mostly driven by the uptick in possession of dangerous weapons. So here's what we've done. So we don't tolerate violence or bullying in our schools, period. But our approach is less punitive and more preventive. Every student carries a different experience into the classroom as a result of the pandemic, and we are proactively working to pair students with the resources and supports that they need to thrive. Hence, our ecosystem of care that addresses the whole child. Mayor Adams and I are proud of our in-school network of guidance counselors and social workers that is now approximately 5,000 members strong. This scale of support guarantees that every school has, at minimum, access to a social worker, guidance counselor, or school-based mental health clinic, ensuring a solid foundation of care for all of our students. And since the start of the pandemic in 2020, we also bolstered efforts to nurture student well-being and mental health by supporting school staff and students with vital restorative practices, professional development, and coaching. Restorative justice practices create inclusive school climates and equip schools to effectively manage behavior incidents, reducing the reliance on suspensions. They provide spaces for students to express themselves, actively listen to one another's perspectives, and build a sense of community, allowing schools to address underlying issues in a productive and positive rather than exclusionary fashion. In addition to trainings in restorative justice, the DOE increased workshops, curriculum, and resources for school leaders and staff, as well as programs and workshops for our students to strengthen safe and inclusive learning environments. So these supports cover various topics, including social emotional learning, bullying prevention and intervention strategies from our Respect for All program, and LGBTQ inclusion, trauma-informed care, digital citizenship, implicit bias, and culturally responsive practices. All school staff had access to training on using practices that emphasize mindfulness-centered approaches to conflict resolution and discipline. These expanded restorative justice trainings have given our educators the tools to prevent conflicts before they arise, better manage incidents in the moment, and restore the culture of their classrooms more quickly after altercations. And since expanding these practices, capping the length of suspensions, increasing access to mental health supports, and expanding social emotional programming, we have made substantial progress. So over the last decade, suspensions have decreased by 55%, keeping more children in class, engaged, and learning each day. And the disparity gap in length of suspensions has also been significantly reduced. We have also increased our core of school safety agents. And that's very personal to me, because as you stated earlier, I once served as a school safety agent in Brooklyn, New York. And today, there are approximately 4,000 school safety agents who are employees of the NYPD, but who support our schools. And this includes 150 new school safety agents that joined our school communities just last month. So these agents are integral members of the school community, ensuring a safe, secure, and supportive school environment for all of our students. Of course, safety is multifaceted and needs to be approached in a way that also addresses students and staff members' emotional as well as physical safety. So we invite our safety agents to participate in the professional learning we offer our school staff, such as Cornell University's Therapeutic Crisis Intervention for Schools, which empowers educators to identify and diffuse conflict before it becomes a crisis. We're also working with our partners in the NYPD to strengthen the current training model to include youth development practices and techniques so that agents have the skill set to holistically support students' social, emotional well-being. So with the ultimate goal of providing complete safety. And we know our schools will benefit from Mayor Eric Adams's blueprint to end gun violence, which enhances the New York Police Department's efforts to fight crime, including the launch of an unprecedented summer youth employment program, which will connect youth between the ages of 14 and 24 with career exploration opportunities and paid work experiences, helping to prepare them to be responsible citizens and succeed in careers of the future. So I stand fully behind Mayor Adams as he works to rid our city of violence, restore peace to our neighborhoods, and bring healing to our school communities. As part of this work, we're partnering with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice to align credible messengers and violence interrupters in schools located in very specific targeted neighborhoods. And we're currently looking into less invasive scanning technology and have met with a few vendors already to demonstrate that technology. One of the things that many of our students have shared with us is that they don't like going to school and being what they consider to be surveilled by the scanners. And that's part of the reason why we have made these investments, and we've continued to have these meetings with many of the companies that are trying to provide a less invasive level of technology to keep our kids safe. Investments like these lay the groundwork for future healing in our school communities. Restorative justice and trauma responsive practices in our schools are leading to safer, more caring environments for our students and school faculty, a reduction in bullying and other interpersonal conflicts, a greater commitment by community members to actively listen to one another, and a focus on social emotional learning to build academic as well as social skills. Our schools remain safe havens for our students and our community members, places where our young folks can find the supports that they deserve and connect with trusted adults. Their safety continues to be at the core of everything that we do. And this work goes to the heart of who I am as an educator, a father, and a school system leader. And I believe with every ounce of my being that every young person is filled with brilliance, promise, and gifts. I believe that all children deserve a strong academic foundation that prepares them to graduate with an employable skill set. And I believe that they deserve the tools and support they need to be safe in our schools and physically and emotionally healthy. And that's why I signed up for this job. I've only been here for 4 months, but I'm not going to let our young people down. So I want to thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you, Chancellor, for that inspiring account of what you are doing and all the efforts that are being made by the New York City school system to ensure safety of students. But let me ask you this question. Students are not coming to school. Absenteeism rates are climbing. Chronic absence, it's not just in New York City. I'm not talking about New York City. It's happening in places across the country, but it's also happening in New York City. So With absenteeism on the increase, enrollments down, students leaving for other private schools or moving to the suburbs, given all that you're doing, why is safety the reason why parents are doing this, or how do you address those concerns?
A great question. Safety is not the primary reason why parents have been leaving the system. And you should just know, during the last 5 years, we've lost 120,000 families from the school system. Now, this decline started prior to the pandemic. Sometimes people want to blame everything on the pandemic, but it wasn't entirely the pandemic. And much of it really was, and as we've talked to our families across the city, the sense that we don't have enough quality schools, we don't have enough quality programming. We had a lot of families who decided to leave because the signal from the last administration was that we were going to get rid of all gifted and talented programs. There are a host of reasons why I think families have left. My job now, together with the mayor, is to be a champion for this system and to rebuild a level of trust with our parents and our families. So let me give you one example. We just recently made an announcement that we are going to expand the gifted and talented program. So they're not going away at all. We're going to expand it. We've added some seats to our kindergarten programs, but we've also done a much more significant launch at the third grade level, which we think is a much more appropriate grade, even for the gifted and talented assessments. And in that space, I will tell you, we've heard from families across the city who are thrilled to hear it, including families who have left the system and said that they're inclined to come back because they appreciate what this new administration is doing. Our job is to continue to listen and to be responsive and to lift up programs. And when safety is an issue in any of our schools, we have to ensure that it is dealt with. And that is exactly what we are doing. We are still down the number of school safety agents that we would like to have. The mayor knows that this is really a priority. We just graduated a class. We're sending another class that's going to start in a couple of weeks. But I also think it's very important for everyone who's watching this today to also understand that safety is not just the purview of a school safety agent in a school. They are part of the puzzle. But the biggest thing around safety is really the culture of a school, number one, and then the surrounding community, the issues that are happening in the community, which have to be dealt with, which more often than not engage other community members as well as the New York City Police Department. So there's no one simple answer to any of these things, but it's very difficult for students to learn and to be their best when they don't feel safe. And it is our job to ensure that that happens, and that's what I'm totally committed to.
Speaking of the culture of a school, so you mentioned the rise in gun carrying incidents and gun violence in schools. Again, not just something that we're observing in New York City, but in lots of places around the country. And you also talk, so sometimes when gun violence increases in schools, one of the responses is to increase metal detectors, increase different visible deterrents, video surveillance. And so some researchers find that this can actually make parents and families and students feel less safe when they go up to school, almost like they're walking into a correctional facility rather than a school. So I'm wondering where you fall on this, because in some ways, these types of visible security measures may be great deterrents for gun violence, but in other ways, they may make school communities feel like the school is less safe. And so how do you kind of fall on this issue? What's the right balance to strike?
It is an absolute conundrum. You're totally right. And we're continuing to try to strike that right balance. We've heard from students who will tell us at the same time, I don't feel safe, but I don't want more metal detectors in the school because I feel like I'm going to prison every day when I'm on my way to my English or math class. It's one of the reasons why we've been having meetings with various companies who are developing new technology for metal detectors, where you could walk into the school, never even see any metal detector, but the technology is in fact in place to pick up if there's any dangerous weapons or metal. Now, what's interesting, there's no company that we've met yet that has fully developed this technology, but they're getting a lot closer. They've got technology, and some companies that have already developed the technology. They can pick up a knife or a gun pretty quickly. They may not be able to pick up a can of mace or brass knuckles or pepper spray, right? There's some other things that are much more prevalent in schools than guns are. And we want to make sure that we're also checking for those things as well. So promising meetings that we've been having, promising technology, I think that's on the way, because it's a demand across schools, in schools across the country. And so I think, sooner rather than later, we'll be in a much better place to do that. Now, that being said, students also, beyond the metal detectors, also want to know that they are in fact safe. The rise of weapons that we have found in our schools, interestingly enough, all of our early data is showing us students are not bringing those weapons to engage in conflict in school. They don't have a problem with their classmates. They've been saying we're bringing it to protect ourselves when we leave school and on our way to school. And that is what has dramatically changed. We've seen the uptick in violence and guns and gangs in the community here in New York since this pandemic. A lot of negativity set in place. And now with the advent of these ghost guns, which are so easy to make, we've got a real challenge here in all big cities across the country. And so it's one of the reasons why Mayor Adams, who's a former police officer, was elected to be the mayor. And so they're working steadily on this issue. My job is to keep our kids safe and our teachers and our faculty safe. We're doing everything that we can to do that. We feel pretty good about where we are, can always get better. But your question is one that is an issue that we are dealing with every day, and we'll continue to try to get better at it. Building the right culture in schools is probably the most important thing that you can do. When kids trust the adults in schools and recognize that they're surrounded by people who love and care for them, those kinds of relationships make all the difference. Because you'll have kids who will come to school and tell the principal, they'll tell their teachers about some potential conflict, or they heard that somebody had a weapon or something, and they will alert the school adults and staff prior to anything ever taking place. And generally, you won't find these kinds of conflicts and confrontation in places that have a good school culture. So we have to continue to build school culture while at the same time trying to get rid of these weapons off the streets.
So Chancellor, there's been a lot of concern that there's a school to prison pipeline, especially for minority students who are sometimes they were suspended or expelled, and then the safety officers at the school report disciplinary infractions to police departments, and then they get targeted, and pretty soon they're in jail. So with the increase in safety measures that you're introducing, do you worry about this? And how do you try to plug up that pipeline?
Well, even before I arrived here as Chancellor, I will tell you there's been a lot of really good work dealing specifically with that issue that you raised. For a long time, that in fact was the narrative, the school to prison pipeline. And it fully engaged African-American and Latino boys as the primary targets of that. And that's a huge body of work that I invested a big part of my life in through my work at the Eagle Academy. And so I know it firsthand. I've seen it. I've seen how it's played out on a national scale. I think New York City has done a good job of beginning to mitigate for a lot of those kinds of issues. And it's a body of work that we're going to continue to support here. Students, teachers and principals can't suspend kids for every little thing in the ways that they were able to do in the past. So that's the whole notion of restorative justice practices. It's really important that schools have to be a place where kids learn right from wrong, and that there will be consequences for bad behavior, but it doesn't mean being thrown out. When you have schools that want to sound tough and say we have zero tolerance policies, I think that's a horrible place to be. Zero tolerance for kids. Kids make mistakes, as we know, right? Kids do all kinds of, pardon the expression, dopey things. It's part of the reason they're kids. And we got to make sure that we're teaching them so that they get better. But if the response is to simply throw them out, and many kids get used to being thrown out, we can't continue that. And here in New York City, we've done a much better job over the last several years of doing that. And I will continue to accelerate those kinds of policies and practices that keep our kids in school, keep them engaged, but also hold them to account, but in a much more holistic and positive way, and not such a disciplinary fashion as had been done in the past.
Chancellor, where would you say the line is there? Because I noticed that some organizations and parent groups in the city have said, well, the emphasis on restorative practices in some cases can lead to a student who's committed or been involved in a serious offense on school grounds, and then a couple of days later they're back in school, and it doesn't feel like, at least to these parent groups, that there have been any consequences for that student. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the line, because it seems like also, again, a really tough balance to strike.
It is, and these are tough questions you're posing because there are no clear-cut answers to these. But I would just tell you, by and large, a student brings a weapon to school, that's serious. You bring a loaded gun to school, that's serious stuff. But if you maybe utter a curse word at a teacher, that's not right. You should not do that. But the response to something like that, being perhaps disrespectful, shouldn't mean you're thrown out of school for 2 weeks. Those are the kinds of things. And so it's finding those balances between the kinds of things that actually serve as a real threat to everyone in the school versus students really learning to be much more responsible, be more disciplined. I believe in consequences. Listen, I was raised in a police household. My dad did 27 years in the New York City Police Department. My brother went on to become the chief of police in New York City, the highest ranking cop other than the New York City Police Commissioner. So I've been surrounded by this like my entire life. And as I mentioned earlier, I wore a uniform. I was a school safety agent even before I became a teacher. And I've also raised 4 children, including three sons. And so, no adult wants to ever have a child be disrespectful to them. And it's certainly a response that is needed. And so we're saying, no, we certainly want a response. We want to change the behavior, but there are ways to change the behavior without being overly punitive. And so we're continuing to try to find that line in that space. And we do that by talking to school personnel as well as families. And I think between the two, if we keep that level of ongoing communication going, we continue to refine where that fine line really is.
Thank you.
Chancellor, we have a question that's suggesting there are no police officers who are assigned to the schools. And are the safety officers able to address the issues that arise in the schools without the active, direct on-site support of the police department and police officers themselves?
I would say, generally speaking, yes. First of all, it's important to note that in New York City, the school safety agents are technically a part of the NYPD, although they are not NYPD officers as we traditionally know them. They do not carry firearms. That's maybe one of the biggest distinctions. We all know who the cops are, the police officers, they carry guns. School safety agents do not, but they wear a uniform which looks very similar to the New York Police Department uniform. They are in fact employees of the NYPD. There was a time when they were not. There was a time when they were part of the New York City Department of Education. And more recently, the City Council has made it clear that they want them to return to the DOE. So we don't know exactly where it's going to lead in the coming months and next school year. We will know that relatively soon. But as it's currently constituted, school safety officers are able to effect arrests. They're able to do many of the things that an NYPD officer can do or would do, But sometimes the NYPD officers are also assigned to a school in the event that there's some major crisis that has happened, or there's a full-scale, mass fight that has happened, and you need more bodies to help to deal with it. Unfortunately, we do have from time to time those kinds of incidents in some of our schools. But in most of our schools, the overwhelming majority of our schools, there are a handful of school safety agents. They are every bit as relevant to the fabric of that school as Miss Jones, the third grade teacher, right? Or Mr. Henrik, the 10th grade science teacher. Schools where you have a good culture, good leadership, teachers who are fully committed, families which are engaged, the school safety officers are also a part of that fabric. They are not seen as, quote unquote, people who are policing our schools. They are part of the family of the school and a valuable part of the family as well. They're there oftentimes just to, give a kid a pat on the back or a word of encouragement or a hug, just like any other staffer would be. That's when it works well, and it does work well in the vast majority of our schools. We spend most of our time talking about the places where there have been challenges, but I have visited schools all over New York City. And people that would say, we don't want school safety officers in our schools, most of the people that I've heard who've said that are not people who work in our schools. The people who work in our schools, the teachers, the principals, the students, they don't say that. And it's because they're part of a culture that works.
So as students have come back from the pandemic, it seems that, again, not just in New York City, but in really districts around the country, that there's an uptick, as you noted, in fighting. There seems to be, at least anecdotally, teachers, students, parents are reporting that there may be some mental health issues to address. And I'm wondering if you're also seeing this in New York City, and what kinds of strategies are you considering to kind of address some of these post-pandemic issues that are emerging?
We've seen some of this, a pretty significant uptick as we got back to school. We're seeing it decline less and less and less. So that suggests to me that as our kids are getting more settled in, back into the routine of school, they're finding themselves kind of getting back to more of a sense of normalcy. And we're very excited about that. Now, that being said, I've heard from school leaders across the city who say, when our kids came back, they really came back different. They came back with an edge. They came back with short tempers, and many of them just not feeling good about themselves. So we're continuing a whole host of things, one or two of which I mentioned earlier. We've got a lot of schools which are engaged in the practice of mindfulness, which I find really exciting, and I was really delighted to see it happening in so many schools around the city. I didn't realize that so many schools were actually doing that. And the practice of mindfulness is really about teaching kids how to center themselves, how to breathe deeply, and how to just reflect before reacting to incidents. And it's been a practice that I've seen many of our teachers across the system also engaged in as well. And I think it's things like that we have to do, that we have to continue to spread and help other schools understand what are their peer schools doing that is working. And those kinds of mindfulness practices, kids being engaged in much more social, emotional relationships and initiatives, working with community-based organizations, which also engage kids in a host of different experiences, recognizing that as a school, you don't have to do it all by yourself, that you can in fact invoke the larger village for real help and support, while recognizing that we've come through a very, very difficult time and we're not completely out of the woods yet. And that our teachers also need support. So we've helped to foster peer groups across schools where teachers are looking to provide support for one another. Every school now has the funding in place to hire a social worker if they didn't have one before. All of these things are making a difference. But I'll tell you, I think the number one thing that we've done that has helped with this issue, as well as others, is one of my major pillars since I became chancellor was to scale, sustain, and restore what works. And what that means is that there are a lot of schools that are getting it right on a lot of issues. We want to ensure that every school across the city can see what the other schools are doing and learn from them and get better. It's not enough to just talk loudly to other schools and say, you better improve, right? You've got to give them the tools. And one of the best tools is to see what other schools are doing. Schools that were in a similar place and had to figure out how to overcome, and they did. And what are those lessons learned? What was that process that your school went through to get to a better place that can be instructive for the schools which are now sitting in that place of trying to figure it out? We don't all have to reinvent the wheel, but if we share the best and promising practices, and that's what our intention is. You're going to see more about that in the coming weeks, particularly as we go into the next school year. It's also a way in which we're trying to engage in a better way our charter schools across the city. Many of them are doing amazing work, and we want to make sure that we're sharing some of their best practices. But what I've also learned, which doesn't always get the media attention, is that we've got traditional public schools, which are phenomenal, some of the best in the country. And many parents have no idea that they even exist. And so I'm going to be working really hard to lift up that body of work and lift up those practices across schools so that everyone can get better.
Well, Chancellor, I have 2 grandchildren in the New York City school system, I want you to know, and they're both going to fantastic schools. So I just want to second what you just said. There are many fantastic public schools in the New York City school system, and we should never forget that.
And we forget it often. We really do. And the people who benefit are the folks who go to those schools, and it's been great. But think about the lessons learned from those schools and how they can teach other schools to be better. Not that you'd have to adopt everything that they do, but there may be some practices that those schools are engaging in that you would be sitting in a school on the other side of town and would say, wow, we can try that. We never even thought about that. That's what my goal is, to make sure that all the schools are learning from one another.
So the New York City school system, before you arrived, had a very antagonistic stance towards charter schools, or at least it was coming out of the mayor's office back then. And yet, we do see that charter schools are proving very effective in New York City as in other urban areas. And so I was encouraged by your comment that you want to work more closely with the charter schools. Do you see an opportunity for more collaboration, more working together, more sharing of facilities between the charter sector and the district school system?
Absolutely. Part of the reason why, and a major part of the reason why charter schools were created in the first place was in fact to be laboratories of innovation and creativity that would then share out to the larger system so that all the other schools could get better. And basically to say, we're not going to put you in these kind of in a box. Think outside the box and figure out ways that would better engage kids, better level of professional development for teachers. We're going to give you that freedom to do that. And then we want you to take what you've learned so that we can all get better. Well, somewhere along the line, the sharing out to the larger systems stopped, and the charters became an entity unto themselves. Those are the walls that I'm trying to break down now. And I think that there are real opportunities for us to do that. I think it's a way for the charters that are doing great work to scale their work without necessarily having to continually open up new charter schools. As we say, teach a man how to fish, teach people about those best practices. That's what I want to be engaged in. But I also recognize, as you said, there are other traditional public schools that are also phenomenal. And we want to make sure that they're sharing, and they can share with charter schools as well. We did some amazing work when I was at the Eagle Academy. We figured out some really good practices of how do you engage boys, and particularly boys of color, so that they believe in themselves and fully engage in the educational experience. I feel very proud of some of that work that we've done. We put a school in every borough in New York. We put one in Newark, New Jersey. We think that we have some things that we could share that every school could learn from, including charters, around how to get the most out of these boys. And that's just one example. there are other schools all around New York City who have almost a specialty in certain aspects of youth development, curricula, teaching practices, various methods, family engagement. So our goal here is to create a portal where all of these things get to be shared. We can interview the principal and teachers and talk to kids and families at these different schools and put it on display where everybody can see what everybody else is doing, learn, be inspired, and get better. That's my goal.
And is there a concern? So some are concerned that if you have charter schools or schools of choice that are offering more seats to students, that the families that are looking for safe havens, they'll be the ones that are able to go out and find them. And then other families maybe who don't have the social or financial resources to access those schools, they kind of get left behind. So is that a concern for you? Where do you kind of fall on that?
Yeah, that's not really a concern for me. The biggest part of my job is I'm the chancellor that oversees the traditional public schools. So I don't have direct oversight over the charter schools. They're all of our children, but my job is to make sure that the traditional public schools get better. And I'm going to give that everything that I've got. The charter schools, many of the charter schools do a really good job of marketing what they do. I'm going to do a better job of helping to market what the traditional public schools are doing as well, so that the parents have choices all across the board. And oftentimes they will bypass a middle school, one, because it is not performing well. So my job is to make sure that they do a much better job. And two, often they will bypass it because they have no idea about the great work that's going on in their school, because the DOE has never done a good job of promoting it and telling the world, this is amazing stuff that's going on in this school. I have seen some schools since I had become chancellor that I had never visited before. And I walked in and I said, you got to be kidding me. Parents that are spending thousands of dollars to go to a private school, if they knew that this school existed, they'd be lining up to go to this public school. Phenomenal work. But it's never talked about. It's never on the news. There's no marketing and promotion scheme behind it. And so you don't even know. And so if you don't know, you assume that it doesn't exist. I want to help build trust with families by lifting up the great work that's happening in schools across the city, so everybody is aware. And so if you decide you want to go to a charter school, that's great. But I also want you to know about that great public school a few blocks away. So if you're aware of that, then that becomes something you and your family should also be considering.
Right. We've got some great questions. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Well, let me ask you, you mentioned, Chancellor, that the way to school was the most dangerous moment. That it's not so much danger in the school, it's danger going to school, coming home after school. I can remember when I was a little boy, one of the most frightening moments of the day was when I had to leave school. And I wasn't in as dangerous a setting as many kids are today. So but that means you got to involve the whole community if you're going to really address the safety problem. So have you thought of a strategy for, you mentioned the village. How do you get the whole village engaged in the safety problem that involves not just the school, but the environs as well?
That's right. It's a great question. And it's a work that we're engaged in right now, even as we speak. We're developing a very comprehensive safety strategy that's going to be announced by the mayor in the coming days. And it will engage the community. So we've identified the neighborhoods and the specific schools where we have had the greatest challenges, because be sure, these issues and challenges of safety, violence, confrontation does not exist everywhere and in every school. There are many schools that are just fine. They don't have these problems, but we've identified where they do exist and where they are pretty significant. And those are going to be the places that we provide a level of real focus, support, and strategy to change the trajectory of what's been happening there. And much of that will involve what we call credible messengers, community groups, leaders from the community, community-based organizations which have been doing work in those communities, who've raised their hand and said, put us in, coach, we can help. And many of them have been left on the sidelines. we're going to get them off the sidelines and into the game. And we're going to have them in. But I'll tell you, the greatest part of the work that they do is to be mentors for kids, help to build relationships with kids. This all comes down to relationships. Even kids that we think are tough kids who are running around in gangs and causing all kinds of havoc. When you peel back that outer layer, they're just kids who've gone astray and who haven't had the right touch and the right mentoring. And for many of those boys in particular, growing up without fathers at home. You know, I had the great benefit. My brothers and I grew up with my mom and my dad. My dad was a police officer and he was a strict disciplinarian, but he was also a guy who spent a lot of time talking to his 3 sons and helping us understand right from wrong, making the right choices in life, and aspiring to do great things with our future. There are a lot of kids that don't have that. And a lot of boys in particular who grow up without a solid male role model to help them in that transition from boyhood to manhood. And so in the absence, they try to create their own definition of manhood. And then we as a society, we blame them when they get it wrong. And we punish them even more. And that's why I keep saying it's not a winning strategy. My sense is that this nation needs all of these kids to be fully educated, to be fully informed citizens, so that they can take their rightful place in society. We need them. They're not just a luxury if they can make it for themselves. I see it as our nation needs these young people to be successful. And in order for us to do that, we've got to put in the proper interventions. The easiest thing is to just punish them, throw them out of school, you did wrong. That doesn't help. It may make us feel better for a moment, but it's not a long-term strategy that actually makes a real difference. And so to your point, we have been talking to dozens and dozens of community-based organizations in these particular neighborhoods, and we're going to be announcing real partnerships with these groups, asking them to come in, and they'll provide supplemental services to what the teachers and the school staff are doing. And, you know, sometimes kids, they don't want to hear from their mommy. They don't want to hear from their teacher. But there's another group that's in the community that might be just the voice that gets a kid to say, I need to move differently. And we want to provide more of those voices to help change behavior in our schools.
We've got a couple of really specific questions in here, so I'd like to get to those. So one here says, under the previous administration, New York City pursued some changes to the city's discipline code, including reducing lengthy suspensions and also requiring the central office to sign off on suspensions. And apparently this questioner is saying that some teachers have said that this has actually taken away a lot of their discretion over student discipline. And the question is, do you agree with these reforms, and are you considering any changes to the discipline code?
We are looking at the discipline code also. It's all part of the safety strategy that we're looking at. And I've heard this argument. I've heard it made on both sides. I've heard it made from teachers who feel like, you know, they don't have the authority now to provide that kind of immediate response. And then I've heard from other teachers who said this, we think, is one of the better things. It's forcing us to dig deeper and to look at different ways to discipline, and not so much just to discipline, but to change behavior. And I think there's validity on both sides of it. And that's why we're trying to figure out the best place to land. But I do know that a lot of teachers I've spoken to over the years who said, you know, they feel as though some of their authority has been taken away, are also folks who are just quick to just throw kids out.
Yeah.
You know, they hit somebody, we throw them out. That's the strategy. Goodbye. You go home for 5 days. Very often, then no work is taking place. We're sending them back into homes, which are not always the best places to be. And when the kids come back, sometimes they come back even worse. So if we think that that's a winning strategy because, you know, it just made you feel better and you, in a sense, just punishing somebody, then you have at it. But that's not what we see as a winning strategy. But yet, I'm not the person that believes that kids can just do whatever they feel like doing and there are no repercussions. To the contrary, there has to be repercussions that are proactive, that are responsible, but that redeem children and not punish them, and help them to understand the error of their ways and how to get better. And that's the lane that we're leaning in on. And it's easier said than done. None of these questions that you're posing have simple solutions. But solutions do exist nonetheless. And we are engaged in the process of trying to create those.
We're running out of time, Chancellor, but let me ask one last question about student. How can you involve the student community? One of our listeners or viewers has raised this question. Can students be involved in addressing the safety issue? And what's the best way to do it?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I'm glad that's the final question. In many ways, it should be the first question, right? Because a lot of times it's not what we talk about. We talk about safety through an adult prism. And yet the kids themselves will chart the path for how to keep the schools safe and how to keep themselves safe. But it starts with respecting student voice and lifting up student voice, encouraging student voice. And to say, if we're going to make policy decisions, we should not make them without students having their own concerns and their own voice be expressed. We should have student government in every school in New York, and we will. I want to lift up these issues of the day, the issues of violence, the issues of gun safety, the issues of climate change. The issues are wide and varied. Students should have a voice as well in what our response as a system and as a school that they go to should be. And so I very much appreciate that. I've got a student advisory council that I meet with here, but we're going to have student advisory councils in every superintendency across the city. And every school will be lifting up the voice of our students. That's how you really prepare young people for leadership. Not simply be told what to do, but to ask them their opinions and their thoughts around what it would take for us to improve our school, to make it safer, to make it more academically rigorous. What are the kinds of activities that you would like to see? Not me as the principal or the chancellor. This is what I think. What do you think? And you know, we've got to manage all of that. I went to a school, I said, what are the biggest changes? I spoke at an elementary school, and I said to the kids, what are the biggest changes you would make? And one of the boys raised his hand. He said, I think we should have gym and lunch all day and then go home. Well, you know, we gotta take it all into consideration. It doesn't mean that even what the kids say, it's absolute. But we've got to find the value, because what are they saying when they even say that? They like going to gym, they get to move. It's fun. Well, why can't their math class be fun and they get a chance to move and not just sitting down all day? Kids like to eat. Well, you can provide snacks. It doesn't even have to always be lunchtime. So even when they raise up solutions that may sound crazy in one sense, if you dig behind what they're saying, you can figure out ways to really improve the school. Kids love to compete, but they don't like to compete one-on-one. They like to compete my group against your group. Well, figure out ways to make those things happen throughout the school day and not just when they're going to play a basketball game after school. There are a lot of lessons for us to learn if we would only listen to the kids, and I've been listening.
Well, thank you very much, Chancellor. This has been a fascinating discussion of the school safety issue in New York City and around the country. So we very much appreciate your keynote kickoff for our school safety conference, A Safe Place to Learn.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to be here. I wish you all a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much. And as this is a weekly series, to the audience, we look forward to seeing you next week at the same time, where we'll be talking about post-pandemic trends in school safety and whether school safety is a growing concern. We'll be looking at some of the latest data on this topic. So thank you and have a nice afternoon.
Goodbye now.